Data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. Right along here with Ransom Godwin tonight. If we can get connected, Ransom, let me know when you can get back in. Wow, the world does spin. I'm sitting here 4 a.m. start time in Italy with the farmer protest now expanding to Romania, and it is the talk of the town along with the WEF clowns. I'm doing Dr. Seuss rhymes already. Excellent. But it does seem that they have wakened the Germans. And there's a saying, like, don't wake a sleeping tiger, and also don't wake sleeping Germans. As in, once you get that national thing behind you, you've awoken a monster. Now, Dutch farmers, very small country in comparison to Germany and France now throwing down. Romania, just sick and tired of the high business costs. And that's kind of what's getting all the farmers, is the cost to do business. And now with all these carbon taxes and emissions taxes and the shipping delays into the Mediterranean Sea and all these things for fertilizer costs, and just a huge amount of every time they turn around, there's another thing to demonize farming. And we see that with the World Economic Forum. Who was that clown with the fake posh accent that was saying it's ecocide? We have to stop farming and stop all use of the land, and rebrand it as genocide, as ecocide. We need to legally make people stop farming. Okay, well, at least these unelected oligarch wannabe kings and queens of the new Europe, it seems that they've already pushed the hand, because Germany, France, Romania, and Netherlands will probably start back in. But again, the numbers weren't there, and their neighbors did not help them. But now we see Germany, most interestingly, calling on Dutch farmers to help them in their protests. And they're like, yo, did you not help us? And now our land was confiscated. And sure, they got 20% more than market value. But what is it with family land? What are they going to get? That's the whole thing. So let me see if I can add in Ransom onto the call right here. 2 of 3 of us are here. Let me see if I can get Ransom back in. He was having a little trouble back as he signed up. But staying here in Italy right now, and for those of you who are following my journey over on Patreon, thank you for the support. I've been running through naval museums, coastal museums, and trying to find archival data that shows some sort of larger tides in certain times of history, all related to the 4 gas giants into their perfect square, which will occur in October of this year, 2024. So you might ask yourself, why are governments posturing across the planet for the event? And I'm just going to call it the event. You see it happening everywhere in unison, just like the COVID. All nations are like swooping and moving as a school of fish. Everything is moving the same direction. Continuity of government, pushing to make sure citizens are not able to take care of themselves. And now we see, Norway or Sweden, now asking their citizens to prepare to donate their vehicles and homes for the war effort. And I scratched my head and said, what? What do you mean war effort? Haven't heard anything about this. So what war effort are they talking about in advance, warning their citizens? So let me pop on here with some extra large slides. And yes, it's Norway. It is. Norway Armed Forces will ask car owners, do you own a vehicle, a building, or a small vessel, as in a small ship? Then you may be asked to contribute to the national preparedness. They're going to send this out on January 19th, just a day after tomorrow. And wouldn't that be strange if you received a message and said, by the way, we need your house. You need to vacate your home. And by the way, leave everything in it. You have a 24-hour period to get out of there. So Norway, you might think it's a little unusual, smaller country, generous toward the citizens. Very little in terms of what you consider strong arming compared to what we might see in, let's say, a police state across the world that we're familiar with. So if it can happen in Norway, it can sure happen in a country near you. Now, sitting in some coffee shops in the morning, pounding down some espressos. You know, most people here, if you didn't know it, most Italians don't drink espresso until, anytime after 11. Generally cappuccinos in the morning with the heavy milk, with the kind of pastries, etc. If you're seen drinking like 1 or 2 espressos in the morning before 11, they look at you sort of as a serial killer. Like, what's going on with these people? They're double espressoing like 4 times before 11. Uh-oh, look, I keep the kids away from them, But there are people talking in the coffee shops, and papers are all out, newspapers are out. So these clowns at the World Economic Forum are trying to implement a huge amount of new policies, and Italians see through their scheme, for a better term. And it's a scam, a scheme. Like, they come right out and tell you, they use the words new world order, new global order. And they say, well, it's a transition of an era. It's not really a new world order. It's a transition of eras. So they go into this whole thing about, we need to structure the world, and we control it and we restructure it so the jungle doesn't grow back. And what they're talking about is a unipolar world reserve currency that dictates. They can't have that anymore because it's run its usefulness course. So if you look at how management systems are on different farms on the earth here, called political systems, it's just a farming method. Then the world needs a new farming method coming up to let this next 80 years start for the 4th turning, the new issuance of debt, the new golden period after this collapse phase. Now, the thing is, I understand why they're saying that we can't let the jungle grow back, is because nobody will accept the same exact system under a different nation until 3 generations have died off. Then they can bring it back in the unipolar system again with a single reserve world currency. Like, it's very cleverly done with this 4th turning, because the average lifespan is about 80 years. So those old folk who all the young kids make fun of for being too set in their ways, too traditional, too commonsensical, too square, for a better term. Once they're really old, once you get up into your 80s and you see the same things repeating, you're trying to warn the younger kids. They're like, oh, you don't even know what Bitcoin is. Shut the hell up. But wait, you're about to get everything taken away in the digital currency and the central bank digital currency. Well, Grandpa, you don't know what you're talking about. You just hold gold. You don't even have a digital wallet, dude. So then you get into this whole, oh, wait, you've forgotten everything. Think about those that had lived through the Great Depression. seeing what's happening right now, they would be quaking in their boots at 2.0 arriving on our doorstep. And this happens time and time again. Every 100 years, it's reset. And here's a couple things for you. Verona, Italy. There is a Roman Colosseum downtown. It's intact and it's in better condition than the one that's in Pula in Croatia, in the Istrian Peninsula. But the interesting thing is there's a segment of the older Colosseum that was built previously to this newest Colosseum, some 2,000 years prior, constructed with the latest Roman technologies, best concrete mixing with the volcanic dust. Yet the older Colosseum had foundation walls that were about twice as thick, and the thing went another archway higher. Let's call it a third floor of arches. But come to find out, the previous Colosseum, which was massive, girthy, and just like unbelievably megalithic on the bottom, foundation stone level, somehow it disappeared in some cataclysm and they rebuilt the new one 2,000 years ago, but they didn't have the technology to replicate the larger one that preceded it. So they built a smaller one. Now there's still a remnant of the old walls. Now somehow this remnant remained and they're very unsure. It's just like the stones were reused for rebuilding something, this or that or the other. And the story is always the same. It's like a copy, paste, copy, paste. It seems that everything that was antiquitech or large megalithic just somehow got chipped into small blocks and reused into the rest of the city, and barely anything remains of the previous society. So that is 2 resets ago. The one that was just so much larger than even the Roman, you had to think they had slaves, they had like unlimited manpower. Supposedly the best carvings and the best stone carvers in the world, the best concrete in the world, the pulleys and the different types of building techniques to, bring things up 100 feet into the air. Yet they were unable to replicate what was previously built. And that's kind of strange in itself. But that is the only thing that is consistent, that remains through Italy is, and we went down to Venice also because that's where the Maritime Museum was. And I'll tell you a little bit about this Maritime Museum. By far the nugget of all nuggets. If you're looking for ancient history information, the Maritime Museum is where you want to go, because that thing, man, was a dusty treasure trove of hasn't been touched since the 1980s. And some of those displays were done in the 40s, and they haven't changed since. Like, it's a very neglected museum, but I loved it because it was authentic and it was real with the naval history. And, a couple nuggets that I found in there. First, they had 3D. And when I say 3D, I literally mean somebody built like Lego block 3D kind of thing. But back in the 1940s or so, paper mache kind of thing. But they showed every single star fort that the Italians controlled from the late 1500s to the early 1600s. It showed the size of the star fort, the port it encircled. And I'm telling you, there was a lost pre-builder part of at least a couple of these that were just so massive. And they actually did oil paintings of some of the largest of these facilities. And I'm talking, they sculpted mountains away. Gigantic, huge 80-foot statues, 100-foot statues at the entrances of these things. Something that's so far out the possibility of, moving 5 billion bricks. 200 million facing stones, 30-foot deep walls, and multiple sets of them. Oh, wait, and then they moved in entire mountains out of the way for this. Like, what is being found, seen, And this Naval Museum was just mind-blowing in that section alone. And then they had the naval maps. Not only did the naval maps show Tartaria, but they had the flags of battles with the Tartarian flags in the naval battles on the ships from the 1400s, oil paintings. But they had these massive scenes of all these crazy naval battles from back in the 14, 15, 1600s over a couple hundred year span of time. But that very sharp-headed eagle / phoenix with the single wing poking up in the Tartarian flag is on the ships, as well as Tartaria's across all the maps in that naval museum. And the ports, well, they were larger than we think. And when I started to look at some of these same ports, I went back to Google Earth and I looked at it. Every single one of these ports, or the star forts in the original one, have been completely destructed, and a modern container ship port was put right in the same exact area, pretty much destroying the entire shape of, but keeping some of the canal systems going into. Now, I ended up going to one out near Venice. It was called, what was that one? Margherita Fort. And it was partially submerged. Half of it sunk underwater, and the other half was above water. So somehow there was a land subsidence event where this star fort sunk literally like right in the middle, half of it sunk underwater. So the above ground water part now has some restaurants. It's quite, it's big enough to have restaurants, a little art gallery in there, a couple streets, and they have it's this place where you go feed cats, and like hundreds of cats. They're all huge, like the cat houses everywhere. And, it's a thing to bring your family. Let the kids play with the cats. You can go, have draft beer out and get some Italian food, walk around the Star Fort. And there's like thousands and thousands of birds around there. It's quite the nature reserve area too. But you know what? Not a single facing stone remains on the entire facility. It's all been removed. And 100% of it is just natural vegetation around where the facing stones would have been. But the walls were about 30 feet, a good 30 feet thick. But on the backside of every single, like Star Fort that you go to, there's always these facing stones going into the water. Now, the foundation stones are still there. Obviously, it has to be. But everything else has been stripped. I mean, stripped bare. There's not even a brick left there. Nothing on the facing stones on the outside. Even when they cut through a couple sections of the walls where they made some new roads, with a bridge so you can get in the center of it for like I said, going to a pub, a restaurant. There's like all these different restaurants in there and things now. There's no bricks even. It's all gone. It's been stripped, completely stripped. But it still has the canals and everything in there. So it was worth the day trip to go out there to see a completely stripped one. And seeing something that has fortified walls in Palmanova and Venice itself is just a ridiculous, like outrageously unbelievable, gorgeous place. But here's what gets me. They say that Venice, this city, I mean, you're talking like 6 times 4, about 2.5 miles long by a good 1.5 miles deep on one section, and then another mile wide here and a half mile. These are some massive, city islands. The story goes like this. Back in the 1400s and 1300s, they were running from marauders coming out of the mountains of Italy, and they got pushed to the shore. So instead of like building on a marshy area, they decided to go some 3 miles out into the open marsh, beyond that into deep water, and pound 75-foot or 50-foot deep, what you consider now telephone poles, sharpened all the way down through the mud layer till it reached the clay layer. And then what they did is after they put millions of these down, they had surface slabs that they slabbed stone over the entire millions of these poles, 2 layers deep. And then they put an outer facing layer so the sea wouldn't actually hit the lower layers. And then they built all of the what you know as Venice today on top of that. And I'm thinking that's impossible. No, don't believe it. Yeah, sure. When they're repairing some of the buildings, they do find these posts and poles, right? And they've turned to concrete apparently because they're in the sludge, they're in the mud. There's been no way for the wood to decompose. But I can't believe in my right mind in the 13 and 1400s that they're out there with something that's 50, even 30 feet long poles. And where do they get the technology to ram those poles through the thick mud down into the clay layer and space them equally so there'd be weight distribution perfectly enough to build what you know as Venice today? And I'm talking the Basilica. There's like trillions of pounds of stone on top of these like wooden things, apparently. So for me, this is another, they inherited that. They did not build in the 1400s and subsequently 15. They can barely even repair it. There's some leaning buildings there. They're afraid to repair because they can't even really get the things up and like straighten them up without fear of toppling over the buildings. They can't even repair it in today's most modern technology and engineering without using millions, and I mean tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to repair a single foundation on a single tower or a single building. That's how difficult it is to repair it today. And you're telling me that they just went out into the marsh somewhere and pounded all these millions of poles, tens of millions of telephone poles down in through the mud, double surface layered it with square miles. We're talking dozens of square miles of stone slabs, double layered, all while this is in the 1400s. And then they built what you consider some of the greatest architectural feats on the planet on top of that. Now, I could see it with the same builders of the technology back in, Verona with the massive second Colosseum. And some of these lithographs and, these oil paintings, I mean, some of the, most of you know Game of Thrones. But I mean, imagine the biggest, most giant fort and wall, like the ice wall, and just the biggest things you've ever seen in Game of Thrones, and then multiply that by 5. And that's the size of the star forts that are in these oil paintings. Like there was a previous builder society on this planet that precedes anything Roman, anything Greek. They were inheritors of this. And there's no way in my right mind I will go to my grave. There's 0% chance that that timeline that they give you for the building of Venice is correct. Not a chance. 0%. The flimsiness of the excuse, or at least how they built it, was just mind-bogglingly thin. And why can't you repair it? Well, they don't really have answers for that. Another thing, if you go down into Venice, you're going to come to these massive like palaces and cathedrals and towers. But in these are also museums. So I happened to get up to this ancient history museum, and I forget the gentleman's name. It's the most famous cartographer in Italy. Carnianelli or something like this. Coronelli, I do believe. Anyway, I go to the museum. They have these massive globes, like proper world globes, but these things are like 4 feet tall, And the first one I looked at, it was out in the open, and Tartaria's on the top, again, very referenced. It has what you consider the United States and Mexico, but, Mexico, the Gulf is separated from California. It's not connected to California like it is today. And this is only from the 1600s, mind you. So Baja California is separated from the contiguous U.S. and there's a huge amount of islands in between. Like it really got ripped off, and a huge amount of islands are there. In the middle of the United States, there's this massive, what I consider like the Mississippian culture Stonehenge kind of thing. It's this big round circle with all these stones sticking up right along the Mississippi River. And it is the biggest thing in the United States on the map at that time. Now, another strange anomaly, when I first went in, I thought somebody had spilled water. I thought it was a water spot/leak that stained the South Pole, because it was only in one area. Like the whole South Pole was not there except for this one area, and I thought somebody water stained it or whatever. So when you go further into the museum, there's a climate controlled of the original globe. I mean, this thing is in total encapsulation in glass, humidity controlled. And I went back down to the South Pole, and sure enough, the same /watermark, which I thought it was the original piece of the Piri Reis map below South America. And the reason there was only one part of South America is because that was the only remaining source map that he had to complete his globe. So if you go to the ancient Sea Kings and you look at that one little piece of South America from the Piri Reis map collection, that is also included on this globe in the correct position, but the rest of Antarctica is not there because they apparently didn't have the source maps. Also, looking into Africa, I was looking for the Eye of Africa because a friend of mine, David Stig Hansen, who's also traveling back, I think he's in Mauritania again. He was on his way. I spoke to him a little bit ago. For those of you following David out there, he's going back to Eye of Africa again right now, so you can follow his adventures over at David Stig Hansen, and Was This Atlantis is one of the channels he's trying to produce right now. And, I always try to take photos for my study also, and then pass them on so he can get more reliable data on where some of these estuaries were flowing that are now dry. But here's the kicker. I'm looking at that same map from the 1600s, and they're showing African megalakes still full of water, rivers, estuaries going out to the, off the Canary Islands there, and just like, what are we missing? Because this historical timeline that we are given is way wrong. You cannot tell me in 400 years, these massive, and I mean massive lakes in the middle of Africa, connected together by all these waterways, have just disappeared in 400 years? And that tosses the climate change thing on its head immediately. That you're telling me that it took, the traditional timeline is the African megalakes were there 7,000 years ago. And they subsequently started to dry out around 6,000 years ago. And it's been a slow drying process all the way until right now. And this is why Lake Chad is so small, because it took 7,000 years for it to get that small. But I'm looking at it going, whoa, 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 whoa. That thing was gigantic 400 years ago. So your timeline of a 6,000 year dry out period is off the rails wrong. I was really surprised that they left these globes right there so everybody could see it. Even Tartaria was on the thing. So, but the way it was spun though, I'm 6'4", so I can reach way over that case. The Tartaria piece was on the very, very, very top. So unless you knew that you would even look at the top of the map, you wouldn't have seen it. And then add that into the Naval Museum with their actual flags in battle, and then Tartaria on the naval maps, but it's called Tartari, Tartari. There's no A in the Italian spelling of it. So Tartari instead of Tartaria. So if you're looking on naval maps and you're looking for Tartari in the Italian maps, skip the A and you'll find the same location, the same thing. Which brings me up to the World Economic Forum. Let me see if I can get Ransom on if he's still locked out. Let's see if we can get Ransom to join us. Ransom, are you there?
I am. I think so. Yeah, I had a
oh, perfect. I got you. Yeah, man. I was just rambling until you popped in. Glad you're with me. Just to continue on the thought of my travels, World Economic Forum is going on here. And what they are saying that disinformation and misinformation is their number one target because people like me and you are giving too much truth against their narrative. So when I see distorted history that doesn't make sense for climate narratives and climate timelines, I like to point that out. But according to the WEF and their sessions, I'm a climate denier because I'm talking about the African megalakes on a different time frame. And also, the battery, I've been in my newest video I put up on Patreon, I was going into the Tesla charging stations not working, the battery technology being substandard for such cold temperatures, and anticipated cool temperatures moving forward in the grand solar minimum. So batteries in the winter are going to be a no-go for a lot of people. But again, that goes against the narrative, and they would be slamming me for this. So they're talking about censorship being the number one priority for this year is to stop people from giving alternative narratives. And I don't know what you're hearing over there about the WEF, but it's front and center right here in Europe right now.
Yeah, that's the push that they're going to be hardcore about for the next couple of years. And they're worried also about AI because people are using AI in reverse the same way that they are doing it, where they make, I'm going to say millions of articles pumping the global warming, man-made climate change agenda. Now other people are using those same tools to counter that. And ironically, I was looking at this thing. So there's a whole new push against, it's called the new climate denial. And, you made it to Vice News and they attacked you on Vice News. So this is a different thing. And they even list our friends, the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, as some of the biggest climate denial pushers. So it won't be long till you're also on that list. If you look at some of the people that are on that list, it's really funny. I'm going to send that to you in a minute. So they have a whole program right now that's just starting to combat disinformation, just like you're talking about, or their version of disinformation. So people are really starting to drop bombs over the target right now because you're about to see a major shift in attacks against anybody with similar messages. Unfortunately, to you, David, the message that you have, it'll be very shortly that you're on this list. And I know for a fact you're on other lists. I'm on plenty of lists. These lists that governments keep track of and private NGOs to target and harass people that counter their narrative. This is a real thing that we're about to experience. I'm going to go ahead and say it'll be hardcore this year. Let me send you the link to this thing because it's just out there. So while you're going around, studying information from the past that's already been changed, one has to keep in mind that every little dispute that's ever happened through history, only the winner of that dispute, war, or cultural movement gets to write the history. And every so often, they rewrite history. And that's what's happening right now. The destruction of history and the rewriting of history. And I think I know why. And it's kind of the whole picture's all coming together to me personally from the business end. I've been paying attention to you and a lot of, information that you've shown about the movement of populations and then the areas that they left being potential for a lot of investment and movement in the economic, world where they're going to move industry, they're going to move populations of a different kind, the ones with more money, into some of those areas. And we're starting to see that happen and roll out. So it's getting kind of scary because they have a big plan. And that plan is coming together right now. Now, it's hard to see all the moving parts. I sent you that new video from TrueStream Media. And they hit on all of the points that I've been talking about for years now about the overpopulation myth, the reduction in populations, fertility, and also just the amount of children having with no other problems. So every country in the Western world, including most Asian countries, are now starting to have a plummeting population. And the population that they have is increasingly elderly. So there's going to be a pivotal moment in the not too distant future that I think that they're trying to cover up. And they do a good point on that documentary of pointing out that the same places that are receiving the most massive population change or how do I put it? The people that are allowing the most people in are the same countries that are having problems reproducing on their own. So much so that they have a number that's between 2025, I believe, is when the reduction starts. So that's basically this year and next year, to 2100, where human beings around the world will be hitting, I don't want to say an extinction point, but a massive reduction in population as a necessarily. And this has happened. You can blame it on what you want. You can blame it on the increase of new cancers. You can blame it on whatever you want. Take a pick. There's plenty of things out there to, if you're with the climate change people, then this is going right up your playbook, because they'll be okay with the idea and the news that's about to come over the next decade about dramatically reducing populations, and the fact that even America, usually thought of as not part of this, has now hit the point where we had more migrants this year than the amount of births. So we're already hitting the point, just like Italy and so many other nations, including Taiwan, China, Japan. So it's not just Western world, it's also a big portion of the dominant countries in the Eastern world as well. Or in other words, the ones that are first world or close to first world countries are the people that are having the most problems reproducing their population. And what this means is at some point, it doesn't matter how many people they bring in to fill the jobs for the necessity, that the number of people that drain the system will outnumber the people that produce. And this is by design. And I feel like, all of these plots and plans by the elite are coming together. And that's why after 2020, they weren't afraid of hiding their plans anymore. So you can count the time before 2020 where they would hide their agendas and say that that's not happening, or say it's conspiracy theories. But after the 2020, hindsight is 2020. We're all getting to see what these plans are, and they're all folding out. So history is directly linked to what's going on right now. Some of the same plans, the same tricks, the same propagandas are being used now that have been used in the past. The weirdest part of it, I think, though, is I think this plan started almost 100 years ago, and it's not going to come to fruition until about 2100, where the Earth that you know now will look nothing like the Earth that will be then. There will be very small populations and a very small elite governance organization that keeps everybody where they are and controls everything from the top down. And I think that's why they're going ahead and letting us know about the technologies we have to create waves of people without parents. And I think in the not too distant future, they're going to be using these technologies and saying that they have to use them because of the problems that they created, which are happening right now: infertility, low birth rates, massive migrations, collapsing economies. Because remember, the smaller the population gets and the more elderly the remaining population gets, there's no one to produce goods, there's no one to buy goods, and that will be the peak of the capitalist society if they don't allow populations to naturally grow in each country. And we're getting right into that. And all of these things tie together. All of the, economic visions of people tapping, aqueducts and aquifers, and the possibility of weather changing permanently could be like, if you look at all of it, I know I'm trying to Swiss cheese it all together here, but they already know what's going to happen. And what we're watching is a delayed reaction by the public just catching on to the overall plan. And people always think, hey, you predicted this and you predicted this, and it didn't all happen tomorrow. And I repeatedly say these programs are incremental. They're designed for you not to be able to fight it, because we're designed to face a threat right now in front of us. And that's what human beings are best at. So whenever these plans take hundreds of years to happen, they catch generations off guard because they didn't know it was coming. And we're right at that pivotal point where billions of people are going to wake up and realize that they've been had, and they're way behind on the curve of realizing what's going on.
Yeah, I'd love for you to send me that article so I could take a look. Diamond on the bad list. Ben Davidson has to be as well. Douglas Vogt, many of you know, who had been talking about the need for different types of blast doors and certain thicknesses. I was an advisor to the government about this event that's inbound. The first bit of it shall hit this year. It'll be a taste of what's to come in 2030, 2031, and then from there, then the biggest event of 2046, apparently a micronova. That's the reason a lot of things are happening. But please remember, join us with the Revolution Radio family right here. If you've been listening to Ransom and myself talk, remember Revolution Radio is founded 2011, alternative internet talk radio venue for voices and opinions finding solution just like ours. But it costs money to continue with the production costs. By helping out, you can help us bring the shows to life that will spur the solutions that we need to take action, as well as there's archives there that you can access. So consider a donation, Patreon, direct payment, cryptocurrency, write them a check, donor box. Because with everything happening in the U.S. currently, the donations to Revolution Radio are down. So we can see this trend of people holding on to their pennies and their dollars a little more than they used to be, more free spending. So I consider this worth my time to spend 2 hours of my time per week, plus all the research I do to get ready for the shows and in the video channel and the podcast and everything. I think it's a worthwhile venue to keep on air because, you know, these solutions, these things that are changing right now, they're trying to take us back to serfdom. And these images and the oils and the oil paintings and the tapestries and these things, you know, they have the Modern Arts Museum, yay, but you can go back into a lot of older paintings that depict what serfdom was like. And it looks none too good to me. It really doesn't. It looks cold. It looks bleak. It looks malnourished. It looks unhealthy. And it looks like you are at the behest of whatever owner that owns you, that they treat you like cattle. If they want to kill you, burn you, throw you out of the window, they certainly can. You're nothing but property, no more than a cup or a glass that sits in your cupboard. That's what serfdom is. And I keep seeing it again and again and again in all these oil paintings all over the place. You know, they're not really sleeping with the pigs in the back, but they're the ones that are tattered clothing serving their servant masters. So if you think you want to avoid that, consider a donation here, revolution.radio, the Revolution Radio family, keeping it intact so we can keep both stations on air, Studio A and Studio B. Again, this is a crucial and integral time for us to talk about this because Ransom hit on that you know, there's something inbound here. With these climatic or weather changes, as you might want to term it, we're at the end of an interglacial. I was talking just earlier about, so quirky that you brought it up, that we're at the end of an interglacial right now. And this interglacial period, which is the warm period between ice ages, this is the longest one there's been in 5 million years, the one we're in right now. It's about 12,000 years of time. On average, they're 10,000 years. So we are way past the averages on this. And for those of you who are unaware, most of the time on Earth, we are in an ice age. There's only 10% of the time on our planet that we are in a warm time like now. The rest of the time of Earth's history is ice ages. 10,000 years of warmth, ice age. 10,000 years of warmth, ice age. And for them to come and say, you're changing the planet, you're doing this, you're doing that. Okay, we are descending into a cooling period that's going to step off eventually and continue on into the ice age. Will it happen tomorrow? No. But this grand solar minimum onsetting as solar cycle 25 comes to an end, which is within 3 years of now or sooner, steps into a cooling period that we haven't seen in 400 years. Now, will we bounce out of this sometime around 2030, 2031? Maybe that's the event they keep pointing to. Like, no, we don't. And it steps down a step cooler. Maybe that's the event that they're really getting ready for. Now, Douglas Vogt, like I said, has passed away. A lot of you might know Douglas's work, the Diehold Foundation. He put out an enormous amount of videos, wrote some books. But his whole thing was about mapping the pole shifts, mapping the electromagnetic excursions, mapping where magnetism shifted, bent, morphed on our planet over the last several million years, especially this last couple 100,000, into the different excursion that occurred every 12,000 years. And he was giving plans and designs to the U.S. government for continuity of government on these massive, and I mean massive, like blast doors that are like 25 feet thick. And then at the end of it, he's like, you guys are on the wrong facing side of the mountain, plus your hinges are too small. And he started to come out with a lot more information, and then suddenly he died of a heart attack just as he was releasing the last two videos explaining where these locations were and how the governments are in a panic to get prepared at the moment beyond what they were before. So something has tripped the wire for them in terms of preparedness off the hook. Now, what do you need to prepare for a government? Well, you need unlimited amounts of money. And we saw that in 2019 when the repo market, which is the overnight borrowing market between banks, because they had to go to our federal government, the lender of last resort, because no bank trusted either bank enough that they would get repaid on an overnight loan, that they even said to other banks, no, we will not loan to you even overnight. But they need this money overseas. We're not talking a U.S. bank to a U.S. bank. We would be talking somewhere in Asia that needed overnight, $100 billion overnight, and then, we'll repay you in the morning. Well, they're like, nope, we don't believe you. So anyway, all these American banks were stuck needing liquidity to lend out. And apparently, I thought it was around 700 or 800 billion per evening that was being used and swapped in and out every single night by American banks using the Federal Reserve. But it was 1.4 trillion was the ultimate largest number during that crisis in 2019. In November is when it reached that. You got to realize 1.4 trillion per night was swapped in and out to be lent overseas because they didn't trust the banking system overseas to repay them overnight. And that was the liquidity that the American banks needed to keep functioning so they wouldn't collapse. What happened then? That financial system was at a collapse point anyway, and there needed to be an event where there was never-ending money printing, where nobody would blink an eye or even ask a single question as to why so much money was being printed and issued, and COVID came along. And we had never-ending money printing for 4 straight years, and nobody blinked an eye or ever asked a single question. We're back at the point now where people are asking a lot of questions. So what do you think could be the next event to trip off that would lead to never-ending money printing? A global war, for sure. The amount of money would be so vast. It would dwarf anything we've seen so far. The amount of money that would be issued would just be staggering. Even to multi-billionaires would be staggered by how much money would be issued. But if you're a government and you're trying to get ready for some cataclysm to come in to make sure you stay in power after the event, then you would need unlimited money to do your last minute preparations at any cost. Any cost. Doesn't matter. It's all going to collapse anyway. Never plan on paying it back anyway. So it just doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is getting the artwork and the gold and the treasures out of the museums near the seaside and getting them to a safe location. And making sure you got repair parts and the tech and the AIs running down in the caves or wherever they're going to be at. But apparently Douglas Vogt said, you guys made a few mistakes on where you placed a few of these things on the wrong side of the mountain, depending on where the waves are coming in and where the supersonic winds might be. And, after the sun throws a micronova in 2046, and then suddenly he ends up dead. Like, very strange. Anyway, rest in peace, my friend. Thank you for the chats and the talks and the emails through the years. And that's where we sit. We sit on the edge of something large inbound. And I am really very focused on, here's the event, at least the way it plays out in my mind for those of you listening. I'm calling it the event. This October, something with the tidal action because of the four gas giants lining up in their square. It could be a week prior or a week after or either or overlap on top of each other, but just think about if our world's tides twice a day were 2 to 3 times higher than they are now. And some of these more extreme latitudes, or higher latitudes, I should say, the tide comes in 20 feet, 30 feet. There's some places where like, man, you can't even go out on the beach because the tide will come in. You can barely even drive fast. You can't outrun the tide coming in. Imagine that instead of being 20 feet, it's 60 feet. And imagine in some places where a 3-foot tide suddenly is a 9-foot tide. But some other areas are going to be extremes where it might be a 5x increase in tidal height. But that would be the inverse also. When the tides would recede, they would go out 2 to 3 times further out as well. So a lot of the shipping channels might not have enough depth in them, or they might go totally dry, depending. There'd be a huge amount of disruption either way, coming in and going out. So this, I believe, is the beginning of the event. And then we step quickly off solar cycle 25 into a 400-year low in solar activity, where this winter that you see right now is the new normal. This is what you can expect. Because how quirky is it that predicting grand solar minimum, incredible cold in the winter times, and we had the year before last and this year, all-time record cold broken just a year apart from each other. This is your new normal for the winters. Now, we just barely kept it together with the grids, all-time natural gas consumption in Canada during this time in Alberta, but now they want to slash that natural gas and put up windmills and solar panels to try to, balance some of that power load. But we are at the very cusp of what we can do as a civilization to keep the power on. And they want to continue to cut reliable sources of power, like natural gas. So I don't know, Ransom, it seems that serfdom returns to us, and there's a lot of messaging out there that something big's inbound, and all this is pretty much nothing more than a distraction.
I kind of think the distraction is part of the plan, yes, to keep people occupied. But at the same time, the things that people are distracted by are the dominoes that are falling right now. I never was, I've read a lot about the micronova idea. I don't know if I believe in that, or the Adam and Eve type story, because, I look at a lot of land masses around the earth and, I'll read a lot of papers. So there's not really much evidence of the entire world having some kind of wave cross over it. However, there is a lot of evidence that something hit North America at the end of the Younger Dryas, and big chunks of the shelf fell off into the Atlantic Ocean, which would have caused massive tsunamis to hit Europe and Africa, and probably very, very, big tsunamis. So it would have flooded the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, all of that stuff. Would have had massive changes in the geologic environment, meaning there have been flood damage all over. And I see that in North Africa. There's also a paper out that talks about a giant tsunami coming off of the North American coast due to bombardment, and that's related to like the Carolina Bays and stuff. However, the tsunami would have hit Europe and Africa and then produced a secondary and maybe even a third tsunami effect, where it would bounce back in the Atlantic Ocean, back from Africa and Europe back onto the Americas. And then again, this would have been a massive distribution of water. And we know today that the ocean is 400 feet taller than it used to be. So most of probably where human beings lived at that time is submerged underwater. I'm not really worried about that. And I don't think that there's an event quite like that going to happen. And I'll tell you why. the event that we're all waiting for is already happening, and that's the plateau and then continued drop of human population on the planet, which is going to crash markets, crash economies, and it's going to continue to happen. And I know the elite know this, and they may also be, calculating what kind of natural disasters might also happen in this period. So don't forget, we have things like Apophis coming in, and we'll get back into that, and the World Economic Sphere and control of AI.
We'll be right back after the break. David DuByne right here with Ransom Godwin, taking it through the second hour. Apophis and the World Economic Forum. In the same sentence, you know it's going to be an interesting hour. Come on back.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
In the ancient world, gold was magical. Gold was a manifestation of the sacred, and objects fashioned from it were a means of connecting with a supernatural world. Far from passive deposits of wealth, gold was sacred. It was greatly prized in cult. Objects made of gold were active agents in an ongoing engagement with powerful forces. The Inca used gold to make ritual objects, combinations of gold and silver and gold and copper, called tumbaga. Wearing gold jewelry was a sign of a person's wealth and power. For the Inca, gold was also the blood of Viracocha, their sun god. For the Mayan people and many others in ancient America, gold was part of a complex symbolic system. Gold is mentioned in Greek mythology for examples as varied as King Midas, the golden fleece stolen by Jason, who possessed the power of resurrection, through to the golden apples of Hesperides. The golden apples were guarded by the 100-headed dragon Ladon. The dragon conferred immortality on whoever ate them. Over the past 5,000 years, from the Egyptian pharaohs and the merchants of 14th century Venice to world governments in the space age, man has treasured gold for its utility and value during times of both prosperity and disparity. Through the rise and fall of great dynasties and civilizations, gold has maintained its purchasing power as a reliable store of value for millennia. Gold has been used as money since 560 BC, when King Croesus of Lydia created a gold coin in his own image. Ever since, it has continued to increase its long-term value and remains the world's most universally accepted form of money. Today, the demand for gold continues to flourish globally. History proves that fiat paper money is designed to go to zero through inflation, whereas gold has intrinsic value in which it maintains forever. Paper money is a debt instrument. Gold is an asset of wealth in its own right. It does not depend upon any governments, corporations, or individuals' promise to repay. ITM Trading has spent the last 27 plus years developing a team of expert researchers and analysts to make this possible. Simply put, we build strategies which are historically proven to protect your wealth and assets through any economic downturn or currency collapse. Schedule your free gold and silver strategy call 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422, or go to learn.itmtrading.com/MIAC. And keep watching Mountain High Time and Mini Ice Age Conversations if you know what's good for you.
Releasing the show notes from our programs, just bullet point list of what we talked about so you can start the conversation with others or do a deep dive in your own research. Head over to oilseedcrops.org. In the nav bar, you'll see MIAC radio show. Click there, put your email, and we'll get that out to you on a weekly. And please remember, with YouTube's algorithm running today, like, subscribe, and click that bell to get notified.
The food edited
PDF that Ransom sent me over of the new climate denialism, looking at the different characters involved. And you know what it looks for me, as we were talking about last hour before we went on the break, this looks like a planned list of those that are being targeted for termination because their messaging is very clear. Your cherry-picked data from the IPCC doesn't match with real-world facts. Your climate models, I saw a couple charts out recently, and 84 climate models were running 1 or 1.5, some even 4 degrees warmer than the actual temperatures measured through even inflated data station temperatures. So only 1 or 2 models out of 84 were actually remotely close to being accurate, and the removal of temperature stations across an enormous amount of rural areas, leaving mainly urban temperature stations to collect all the data. So of course we're going to get heat islands, and anywhere you're around, airplanes or heaters or asphalt or this sort of thing. This is where a lion's share of the temperature collection data stations are now, in urban heat islands. So if you want to, it's not really faking the data, but it's skewing it to get a certain reading. Now, if we went back like we did in the 1950s, 40s, where 80% of the stations were in the rural areas versus now where 80% are in urban areas, that alone counts for what you consider the heat bumping up, because urban areas are always going to be warmer. But imagine if we could, and they just, NOAA just took down 3,000 stations over the last 12 months, and they decommissioned them. That's the proper word to use, decommissioned. But they were mainly, like I say, rural. So what if we put 10,000 rural stations back into, use again? I'm sure the temperature data would reflect that and be like, whoa, look how much the temperature cooled, because now you're getting a better, smoothing of the data. But, Ransom, I do see here Oppenheimer Ranch Project, and also our friends over at Electroverse, Cap All On, shout out. I know you've been shadow banned and had to move to a bunch of different platforms, from .com to .info to, .org and back and forth, because Google kept removing. And then same thing that happened with my videos and the website. I mean, it just disappeared from reach. And now even people who say, hey, I've been subscribed to your channel, I'm not subscribed anymore. This happens continuously. And even my own channel, it's been stuck at 181,000 viewers for, I don't know, a year. Some videos that I do that I put up in directly load or over onto Rumble get near as many views as they do on YouTube. But I only have 9,000 followers on Twitter. That gets nearly the same amount of views as something that would be on the platform with 180,000 subscribers. And the same thing with Rumble. Some of them were, it says a BitChute, BitChute. BitChute's not a very large platform considering, what YouTube is, but it's always like a 50% watch rate over there compared to, so if I get 20,000 views, I get 10,000 views in BitChute. But I only have like 16,000 subscribers on BitChute. So you know what I mean? It's ridiculous on what the push is for removing views and eyes off of. And I love how there's this super denial class. This is funny. So the CCDH, the guy looks not too friendly either. You look at his front picture. The CEO of this thing just looks like angry and bitter anyway. But there's a super denial class. They're breaking the old denial and the new denial. Well, that would make sense because the science is always evolving. And what they're trying to do is reflect and say, look, hey, advertisers, you're advertising on super denial channels. So, if they're going to push movies and Hilton hotels and travel and everything, might as well be on a denial channel, because you're spewing a bunch of global warming nonsense by having people travel by airplanes on your specials to get them across the planet to stay in your hotels. Do you think those hotels on the beaches you think you removed any estuaries or marshes or any kind of wetlands areas to build these massive resorts along the beaches in like Hawaii or Florida, for example? So it's so pot calling the kettle black for these organizations to come out and go, hey, Hilton, your package where you get people on an airplane and you fly them to a hotel where you destroy the ecosystem. Yeah, you advertised on a channel that actually talks about science and tries to refute claims that make no sense, like the hockey stick. And I kind of laugh at this whole thing. Again, they're going back toward the advertisers. They're saying, hey, this is the copy paste the way they do for all the time. Hey, advertisers, do you know your ads are on this channel? Well, then there's some ESG woke moron over in there that goes, no, we can't have that. Let's remove all the ads off of YouTube unless they take these channels down. And that's the way they're trying to hit it. Watch this thing, copy paste every single time. But like Clay Morris, I think he's a pretty straight hitter on the information there. Like every single one of these is a person I consider a knowledgeable person inside their arena and an expert inside their field of understanding climate. Like Dr. Willie Soon, he's a doctor. And Piers Corbin, he's a true astrophysicist. So I'm sure going to listen to them before I listen to some, a half indoctrinated professor that can only get funding by regurgitating the global warming narrative. Like you're actually claiming that Dr. Piers Corbin is a climate denier. Like this guy's a real astrophysicist. See, this is where I don't get it. They start getting into the Heartland Institute. Okay, they're really deep into the methane emissions, and I know a couple of the scientists that sit inside that on the dairy industry also. They are so wired tight on their methane information that there's no disputing it. Like even in a court of law, they are locked so tight and so wound so tight with their information that you could never dispute it in a court of law because it's so perfect on their findings, and they never release it unless it can be backed up, replicated, peer reviewed, and then they go for it saying, you know what, all this methane stuff you're talking about doesn't make sense because of this, and this fact, and they never want to debate them on that. PragerU as well. They have a huge scientific staff. Alex Epstein, of course, dude's been at it for decades now. And look at this, Anthony Watts. He runs the channel Watts Up with that, coming on the operator of a climate denial blog. Okay, well, they're just picking up news stories and then comparing them to the hockey stick, for example. And then there's 50 peer-reviewed scientists saying a man's findings were flawed, by the way, and Michael Mann, even though he was going to go sue somebody for defamation, he dropped the case at the last minute because they required him to show his findings on how he came up with a hockey stick using public money, public funds at a public institution. And he's like, no, I can't show you that. It's proprietary. And they're like, dude, you came up with the entire thing because of public money at a public institution. Now you say you can't share it. He's like, no, I can't. Okay, I just dropped the case. And this is the way it is with a lot of these climate clowns out there. A, they never want to debate. And B, you can run circles around them with true climate data. They're half hoaxing it, half, scripting something from there. And cap all on. You definitely need to check out Electroverse. But he had to go to a paid for model because, no ads were coming in. So he's trying to generate some cash. And here we are. Patrick Moore, the Greenpeace, he started Greenpeace, and his fingers go very, very deep into this whole entire climate arena, and he's saying that there's a lot of facts we should be asking more questions about here, and especially when you look at the 1,000-year climate record, you're going to see a lot different than what they're telling you in the 70-year climate record, and of course, he's naughty. He's on the naughty list here, and let me run through a few more. Let me see, who is this? I don't recognize that person. Oh, John Stossel. He used to be a reporter. And I forget he used to have his own TV show as well. But they're trying to hit the advertisers. Again, Jordan Peterson, I don't know how well he's really versed in the climate science. Redacted News, I think they were, pretty straight. PragerU, of course, tons. They got a huge amount of scientific body behind them. And Ransom, thank you for sending me this. And again, Revolution Radio family, please consider a donation to keep this type of information flowing on air. Running costs on the station, production costs, to keep our voices coming out so we can have these conversations. But yeah, I don't see myself on the list. I bet if I would have kept going with all the climate stuff, I would have. But I moved tack a little bit because, all right, well, it's so in your face that all the changes are here that we talked about. Now, how does it affect the climate? Or sorry, excuse me, how does it affect the economy? And how does it affect you in your life and the food production? So originally the Adapt 2030 channel was to try to establish that we are heading into a grand solar minimum to look for this, and this to happen. All right, these are all occurring. So for me just to regurgitate the news, okay, I could, but I want to take it into, all right, well, how is this affecting the economy? What can you expect in the economy because of these changes that are occurring with the climate shift? How's it going to affect the food? Well, we've seen it. Calling massive food prices, Ransom, and I've been calling, man, it is going to go up astronomically, exponentially for your food because of these shifts in the jet streams and the cloud cells, not being able to grow food as reliably. And here we are sitting, doubling or tripling costs for food since he and I first started talking about this. And anyway, Ransom, I know I've rambled a little bit there, so please jump back in as I look. The list of YouTube channels that violates the climate denialism policies, and YouTube, you're doing nothing about it, and tell all the advertisers that they're on these channels so the advertisers will force YouTube to remove all of these channels is basically what they're saying here. Dane Wigington, ice nucleation guy. By the way, he called these storms were going to be way, way over anything that was predicted for snowfall. And sure enough, predictions for snowfall were 3 or 4 inches in, East Tennessee and then 12 inches. So Wigington hit that on the ice nucleation thing way before anybody else. So these guys are some of the experts. Not that I agree with everything he says about, geoengineering and thing, but, ice nucleation, he's one of the best on the planet. So anyway, I digress, Ransom, please.
I think this list is really cool because if you notice, it's only one demographic on the right and left. Not all of them. Some of them are actually kind of, you mentioned the founder of Greenpeace. I actually met him at the Heritage, I think it was Heartland, right? The Heartland Foundation. And I met the guy from Climate Depot there in Vegas and stuff. These are all the people that are on the list, but some of these are really mainstream people. And you pointed out John Stossel. Remember, he used to be the #1 trusted journalist, exposing things and showing stuff. He used to air every week on 2020 on ABC. He was their go-to guy. And then you got people like Glenn Beck, right? So there's a lot of Kim Iverson, a lot of the main stuff. They got Timcast. Basically, anybody that questions the narrative is almost on this list. If they've questioned the narrative around the environmental stuff, but it's really funny. And like you said, PragerU, some of the stuff that's on here is unbelievable. There's the suspicious observers, if I could get that out. The list is almost who's who of who to subscribe to on YouTube. Ain't it? There's Tony Heller. They got Tony Heller up there. I mean, it goes on and on. And yeah, I am surprised that you're not on this list, but you've already been kind of targeted before by some of these mainstream outlets that push propaganda. And I think this is going in a very funny way here. And I'm going to show you here. Let's see here. Let's get back to the World Economic Forum, if I can find it. So they're worried about AI. They're not worried about having AI. They're worried that AI will make them lose control of stuff. So what they're going to do is start pushing for countries to outlaw the use of certain kind of AIs and only allow them to be the controllers of that AI. And the reason is pretty obvious. They want to control every bit of propaganda that goes out there. And let's start, and I'll show you how silly this is actually. Here's another one that's funny until I find the article here. I was gang raped in the metaverse. The trauma was similar to real world assault. This is scary because I've been keeping track of these silly lawsuits and stuff. So countries around the world are trying to make virtual activities equate to real life activities. In other words, if you go on and you say something bad or disinformation, or you do something that's offensive, they're going to try to charge you with a crime in real life. And the fact that I find this article specifically so funny is because it's about somebody that went into a website and a bunch of middle-aged men, started flirting, and it kind of clogged their experience. But at the same time, you have millions of people playing games where they simulate murder. Are they going to start charging people with those kind of crimes? It shows you how silly the whole thing is. And then the World Economic Forum, they want to control all aspects of AI going forward. AI fears creep into finance, business, and law. And when you read this, it's not so much about they're afraid that, this will be used against them. That's what they're really afraid of. And here it says it right out here. In the past week, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, the FINRA, FINRA, the Securities Industry Self-Regulator, labeled AI an emerging risk. And the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, released a survey that concluded AI-fueled misinformation poses the biggest near-term threat to the global economy. And that's just what you were saying, right? That they're saying that misinformation is the biggest threat to the economy, not the dwindling populations, not the increased amount of war actions going on around the world, not the shutdown of energy that they're doing to individual nations and individual farmers and businessmen. None of that. We got to worry about global economy misinformation, from the AI. But if they give you all of these articles, speeches, and things, guess what they're using to print most or create most of that? They're using the same AI that they're trying to control. And then all over the place, we're being told that jobs have never been better, but I keep coming across real examples of how that can't be true. Here's one from the LA Times as robot baristas and AI chefs debut in Vegas Tech Show, which I've been there. And let me tell you, if you go to the tech show in Vegas, you will absolutely see the trends for the next decade when you're there. And I went in 2009. And everything they showed is now on the market, has now changed the market, and here we are. So if you would want to get a good look at what's going to be coming out in the next few years and how things are going to be changing, you would go look at this. And what they're talking about in this article is that real life people, the casino union workers, fear that their jobs are at risk, and they are. They are at risk. No longer do we need so many people to run things. And then here's a great article about the economy. China steps on the gas to become the top auto exporter of 2023. I believe that title was with Japan. And they just keep going on and on with the propaganda of things while they break apart the economy from the inside and destroy it. Here's another one. Chinese billionaire Xin Penghuo, if I said that anywhere close to right, buys up $85 million worth of timberland in Oregon. Now, how are they available to do that? And then we have this distraction on the horizon. They've opened up these new labs, worried about the next massive outbreak of what they're calling the disease X. But we can't even get into that because no telling, what they're going to start banning when it comes to talking about that. We have no idea. And just the simple fact that we have to sit here, talk in code, which makes me stutter a lot. It really does, and I saw in the comments somebody complaining that I say et cetera too much. And, well, part of that is because I'm self-censoring. I have words that I want to say, but I know that if I utter them, an algorithm will pick it up, or a human being on some little council will pick it up, and we may get banned or sanctioned or taken off the air. So I'm really careful nowadays. In the past few years, we've had several videos get taken off, strikes thrown against us and other things for just uttering basic ideas that should be covered by freedom of speech. And if the establishments really wanted to inform you as much as they claim to when they complain about misinformation, they would let all information flow so that it would be easily to compare and contrast real information from false information. But they don't do that, because we're about to go into what I call, well, even this article from the LA Times here, or the Wrap, they're about to fire all of their people that work at the newspaper. And this is a trend that's going on in all of the media agencies, which brings me back to the AI. They're firing people to replace them with AI to write articles about how regular people are using AI to misinform you. What a sweet little circle that they've entwined here. And I think what's really going on all around the world right now is they know this population event is going to happen. So they have to get controls on everything, because economies are necessarily going to collapse. And indeed, they also have plans to help collapse it. So what they're doing basically is they know that capitalism has been pushed by crony capitalism so far that it's on the edge of collapse. And what they want to do is push it right over the edge. And they know that they can do that by collapsing economies through war, through restrictions, and then the overall population reduction that's going to dominate the next half century. And I have a feeling that, when 2029 rolls around, and I brought this up before, Apophis is the most likely candidate to be a possible collision with Earth that would cause massive problems to Earth environmentally and as far as a species. It's not supposed to hit. However, it will be closer to the Earth than the moon. And if it goes through this little small area that they call the keyhole, it will whip around and hit us in 2032. And they know that. But regardless if it hits or not, it will be one of those impending emergencies that they can scare the public to death with and get an endless amount of finances over to them so that they can protect you from an outside threat. Let's face it, this climate threat, it's done. And the point that we were looking at all of those channels that have sprung up in the past decade is because more and more of the public is calling out the imperfections, inconsistencies, falsehoods, and missing data from the so-called climate change movement or global warming. All of their predictions have failed. Al Gore in any other universe would be a miserable, disgraced person that would have to be hiding because everybody would make fun of him for years and years of predictions of things that never happened. You remember no more snow by 2013. All the beaches were going to be gone due to global rise of the ocean, and the ice caps were never going to have ice again. And that's why they're having to do this climate deniers. The old argument and the new argument is because they had to come up with a new argument to go against all of the data that's coming out. The fact that the poles are actually increasing in ice now, that the temperature is going down, and the fact that they used falsities where they started right after a major cold period ended to start recording the temperatures so that they could say they were continually rising. They don't point out that they didn't even have these sensors around the globe in the 80s when they started really marking down these temperatures. More than, almost, I'm going to say 90% of the globe didn't have sensors or recording devices to tell you what the temperature was, but yet they act like they have an overall temperature data set that encompassed the whole world, when that's a complete falsity. It's a lie. They have so much missing data. They're all theories. The theories are being debunked, and they're in a panic mode. So what they're going to have to do is replace all of that propaganda on television with some new threat, some new worry. And what that's going to be is war and economic chaos, because that's what we're entering into. And they know that every nation in the Western world is having real trouble with this population thing. It's not just that they're not creating babies. It's also the disappearance of their inherited wealth, so that the children that are born won't be able to afford to live in their own country. that they came from. And then they have all of the medical problems that we don't want to talk about. Why? Why is cancer skyrocketing? Why is life expectancy dropping? Why is infertility happening? Why are people continually sterilized in some of these countries? In India, all the way up into the 90s, they were finding excuses to sterilize people. And I pointed out that documentary that Truth Stream Media just basically came out with, I think it was today. And they do a great job of kind of putting all the points that I've been talking about for years all together in one thing. And not only that, they show that a lot of these countries have already been working on this problem because they know it's coming. So one of the patches that they thought that they would do was invite millions of people into their country. That's not working out culturally. And it's not going to work out as far as they want it to. They were thinking that they were going to bring in enough people to produce the right amount of GPD until their populations recovered. And that's not going to happen. And we can see from the data that all the populations worldwide are declining. So when you're hearing people talking about the world so overpopulated and all of these people are causing climate change, you shouldn't even worry about that because the mass number of the people are going to die off, and including in China specifically. They ran with the policy for years and years and years, and then they reversed that policy. But for some reason, the population didn't just jump on it and start having a bunch of kids. So they are about to be surpassed by India as the most populous country in the world. And I'm saying that in the I'm going to say 2040, it'll be abundantly clear that we're on a dying planet as far as civilization. And all of these families, institutions, NGOs, multi-billionaires are all going to hide off in their little areas while their children wait it out. And they will come out as the masters of the next world, the controllers. Just like every era of transformation that we've ever had, empires collapse, but yet the powers that be seem to come through and raise up a different flag or call themselves a different organization. Like a good example of that is how the Roman Empire converted to the Vatican, but continued to conquer nations in Europe until all of Europe became Christian nations. Now that all of the world has been colonized by empire, now the empires are necessarily going to have to eat themselves, and only one can come out at the end, and that's the world government that they plan. And I'm wondering if we're just going to adopt the communist capitalist version of economics, or are we going to allow other countries to go ahead and take control of that? Judging by the evidence, it seems like we are going to allow different parts of the world to control economics going forward, and they're going to leave the Western world and the United States specifically to rot, to falter on its debts, to completely collapse. And that's why they're pushing these ideas like civil war and all of these other ideas. It's to distract you from what's really going on. And what that is a massive movement of the population in preparation for the reduction so that they have controls on the best areas of the planet, including the Middle East, Central America, and other places that'll be great growth zones. And it makes you wonder every time you see, some kind of uprising or destabilization, who's going to control the farmlands afterwards? So you have areas like South Africa, the Ukraine, the United States. All of these are places that food production is being halted, and they're also having massive amounts of people moving in. So, if you put 2 and 2 together, that equals a really bad time in the near future.
Yeah, what would have value as this economic collapse ensues? Well, metals are the only thing that has had value through 5,000 years of history. Yeah, you have some tools, that sort of thing, a few firearms here and there. But truly what it is to keep you to that next generation would be the metals. And is it a consolidation of all the gold on the planet again into single hands? Because when you talked about that transition from the Roman Empire into the Vatican, what is the Vatican now? It's the world's largest gold depository. Yeah, you could talk about Switzerland, etc., but all the gold was brought into just a few single hands. Now, it seems to me this, colonization period, collapse period, is nothing more than a reconsolidation of all of the gold into a few hands again, and then the system starts over once more after this event occurs. Space threat, great. Global warming, awesome. But hold on, we got a message coming in here. Did I lose something? Did I lose off of there? Oh, you sent me the link, The Guardian. Okay. So back to the farmers here. Stalin called the farmers the enemies of the people by expropriating them, their land, their wealth. The state took control of food production again. Then 7 million Russians starved to death. That's a Holodomor. It's actually closer to 10. The number's unknown. But then 100 years later, we have the World Economic Forum opening the war on farmers again. Again, these things are cyclical. So what happens then with all the gold in Europe? Will it get confiscated back into single hands again? The collapse of nations. What are you going to take with you if you want to flee over the borders? You're going to take your metals with you. Oh, wait, you got stopped at the border. Where does all that gold and silver go to? Oh, maybe it goes back into a repository again. Because it seems like there's a consolidation to, suck up or hoover up all the wealth on the planet back into a few hands again to reset the chessboard, reset the monopoly board again. Because I really can't see very much that would be of value that would be the resetting of a value system. Again, in your local area, using tools or having fuel and this sort of thing, medical knowledge, books, these sort of things. Yeah, that's great for the local area and the homestead or the local communities. But in terms of, restarting an economy or having a way to restart yourself into that new burgeoning economy, you're going to need metals to do that. That's pretty much the only thing. Your 401k is not going to do it. Your stocks are not even yours. You're the very last on the food chain to be paid out by your broker dealer. You're an unsecured creditor. So for those of you who own stocks out there, unless you have that piece of paper in your hand, the intermediary listed you, which is your broker. They listed you as an unsecured creditor, so they are allowed to swoop your stocks. You own nothing unless you have those papers in your hand with a certificate number on them. Like the Great Taking, which we talked about, a couple of weeks ago. You don't own the money in the bank. You put it in as an unsecured creditor in to deposit that money into your financial institution. After 2008 Dodd-Frank and all these other laws that were rushed through, your money, once you deposit it into the bank, it legally belongs to the bank. They own it. They can choose to give it back to you, or they can choose not to. So as we look forward, what do we see happening 2.0? Yeah, the World Economic Forum is saying farmers are now the enemy of the people. Well, this girl with a fake posh accent, in English, she's like the British posh accent. It was so fake, it was too fakety fake. She tried to make it too fake. Was saying that ecocide now should be equivalent with genocide. That using the land to grow food to farm, or to use the land in any way, shape, form, or fashion to make money, whether it be a rubber plantation that's been there for 100 years, or a sugar cane plantation, or a palm plantation, or whatever, that anything that is used of the earth to make profit is now, under her guise, legally ecocide. So this is the big push in the World Economic Forum of any land usage at all that derives profit or disturbs the land to grow food is now, they're trying to label it as ecocide. Now that's one thing. Okay, yeah, a bunch of hipsters over there, get your Birkenstocks and go run back in the field. But now they want to try to get it legally the equivalent as genocide recognized in international courts of law. So if you do have 100 acres or 1,000 acres of farmland, you would be charged with ecocide if you were to farm those properties. So it all rolls back into the control of the food. Like, one thing, the depopulation of Africa by moving everybody out, sending them up to, the United States and Europe and points beyond. So far, there's been 12 million, I'll say it again, 12 million men have left that area in the Sahel, North Africa. Do you imagine what a standing army of 12 million men is? They're gone. They're never coming back. But now that's a depopulated land. And from many years ago, the plans that I had seen and read about was to turn the North Africa and Sahel, as the climate had changed, into a wetter area there, with the North African monsoon shifting, as well as the Aden, the Gulf of Aden, that sort of area there. The shift in the Indian Ocean was bringing more monsoonal rains into Oman and Yemen, refilling the new Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia. And these areas naturally, look at the amount of floods that are now in Africa. You can't even turn a newspaper without seeing another massive flood, another village underwater. Well, that's because they were following the mega lakes as they were drying out. So as all this new rainfall comes in, of course, it's going to drain back to the bottom of their lake bed where all the villages are. So there's going to be continuous flooding of what we know as current infrastructure as these lakes start to refill themselves. Well, the whole point of them doing the cryptocurrency and a stable coin in North Africa and across the world was to try to get workers to go to Africa, all around Africa, with ECOWAS, to get the African Union to send workers there that could be paid in a stable coin that would be convertible in any African nation or globally. If you decided to leave Africa and go elsewhere, you could still use that same stable coin that you worked for in setting up a new grow zone across the Sahel and in North Africa. Now, the ultimate plan, like the World Economic Forum talked about this ad nauseum about 2015, that their envision of the great plan was to forbid agriculture or the use of the land anywhere across the planet. And they were going to set up a specific area for growing food. And this area that would be controlled by, obviously, the same mega corporations, banking, finance. There would be one area on the planet, North Africa and the Sahel. It has, 13.5 million square kilometers of growing area. To put that in perspective, Canada and the United States is 10 million. So there would be more agricultural arable land that could get a double rotation crop, which the United States in many areas, north latitude, are not able to do. The groundwater is still pure. They were talking about tapping the Nubian sandstone aquifer, the Sus aquifer, and the plethora of other aquifers under that region, in addition to the more natural rainfall coming from above. Now, they needed to set in all the roads and all the canals and all of this, that, and the other. Now, China beat them to it, and if you look out, if you use, NASA Earth Viewer, you can see these little green squares where the Chinese are already out there with their irrigation, tapping those same aquifers, and then they're growing that food and sending it back to China. That's why it's so important who controls the ports off of Eastern Africa. Because the Chinese are already in the middle of the Sahel. They're in Chad. They're out there growing. Nobody's bothering them. They got like free land. 100,000 square kilometers, nothing, no problem. 10,000 square kilometers. Dude, just have it, just go grow. Employ a bunch of people. But that was the ultimate plan. Now imagine how much power this puts in just a very, very, very few hands. And see, now I didn't really know how they were going to implement it. But now with this World Economic Forum talking so heavily about outlawing food growing and bringing it up to the same regulation in the International Court of Law, ecocide as genocide, and defining ecocide as a very vague use of land, making profit from the land, growing food on the land as ecocide. Your garden in the back of your house will be under this ecocide genre of you use the land, has to go back to 100%. So swing that over into the plan. We're going to grow all the world's food in North Africa and the Sahel. That way we're going to consolidate in one area. The soil's fresh. We haven't contaminated it. Really, the fertilizers will work, far better here because the land hasn't been used for 100 years like it has in America and Russia and other places. So we're going to grow all the food for the whole world right here, and we will distribute it back to the other continents for you. Now, it's going to cost a little more because we're going to have to send it by ship. But it's going to be a reliable food source. We guarantee it. Oh, wait, until you don't agree with our policies, and then we'll cut off your food. But this is where the whole plan really moves to. And they're out in the wide open now with this World Economic Forum this time. Once I heard her talking about ecocide and all these trying to pass the legislation, and they are working with all the courts in Europe to pass this legislation. And you know, it always starts in Europe and then it moves to the rest of the planet. So within Europe right now, there is a huge push that you will soon see that is probably already written and ongoing, although the legislation's probably already been written like last year or years ago. But it's going to be pushed through all the courts in Europe to label anything on the land use as ecocide. And again, you could be hauled before an international court by using your land. At least that's the plan, the way it looks, the way it's written on these, and the way they're talking about it right now. But outlaw food growing in other nations and then consolidate it just in North Africa. But you know what? There'd be a lot of people there that would want to share in the profits. Oh, wait, they're all gone. Oh, no, we don't have to share the profit. All those people are up in, they're all up in Europe and thing. They're not coming back. NGOs don't do round trip tickets. Didn't you know that? And, you know, this whole climate gate thing. And I wrote a note to myself when you were talking last time, Ransom. Climate gate. You know, for anybody out there who's not familiar with climate gate, they removed the heat spike in the 1930s to make it appear as if it was a continuous warming pattern. But if you look at the original temperature data charts from the 1930s, and if you get into some newspapers from the 1970s, they still have the originals. You had this huge heating spike during the Dust Bowl, and then it cooled back down through the 1940s and 50s, and then it started to run up to where we see it today. So the climate gate was this whole bevy of emails between climate scientists and researchers and university and Michael Mann and all these kind of people to say, you know what, if we remove that heat spike and we cool the past, then we can make it appear more linear, as if since 1880 it's been heating just like on that straight level line. Unfortunately for them, to try to push this global agenda, it didn't. It was straight, and there was a big spike there in the 1930s, and then it dropped off, and it's almost like a W. But that's what ClimateGate was. Is now these new temperature data sets. Tony Heller's very good at picking them out. Jennifer Morrissey is another one that's very good at picking them out. Michael Moore picks them out all the time. Ben Davidson over there at Suspicious Observer is always throwing that stuff against the wall. Anywhere you look, they're continuously pulling out the old data charts and then overlaying it with the new NOAA charts, and lo and behold, that whole temperature spike in the past got lowered by half a full degree Celsius, and it makes it appear more linear. Now, in the 1920s and 30s, there were not temperature stations around the world like they are today. I guarantee there were not. You know, and Ransom mentioned the 1980s until the thing really ramped up with a lot of temperature stations. But they're trying to tell you that they had every square inch of the entire oceans and land surface mapped in the 1930s to know exactly what the temperatures were, although they needed to fake the data to cool the past, because just the temperature stations they were showed this massive heat spike. Which brings me to my last point here. Now, Ransom, when I sent you those links that went 404 unnoticeable or non-readable, this was off Zero Hedge. Here's the title for you: Young Audiences Question Climate Alarmism, prompting calls to censor content. Now, what they found was a recent study revealed significant skepticism among young audiences 18 and below about what we're seeing stoking the fear of global warming, and they believe it is completely exaggerated. Now, this is the youngest generation coming up right now. They're not buying it anymore. And the older generation, like me and Ransom, well, he's younger than I am, but we're not buying it anymore. Haven't bought it in many a year. So now they got the pincers coming in. The younger generation is not going to be paying global taxes, carbon taxes, because they don't believe it. The only people who are there, they're like Greta Thunberg's age, like in that middle, 20 to 35-year-olds are the ones who are really biting on this global warming thing. But they're saying, the kids are saying today, these climate solutions won't work. Climate science and climate movements are unreliable. The impacts of global warming are beneficial or harmless. Hey, wait, didn't we see that whole thing with the Center for Digital Hate trying to say that that's one of the things? Their new climate denial. But the thing is, the kids aren't buying it because the kids have so much access to information that they can run circles around the same climate scientists with the data they can find on their phones. And then we have here, this is another nail in the coffin. You got 1,600 peer-reviewed scientists that signed a pledge declaring there's no climate emergency. Now, if it was 10 scientists, okay. But 1,600 scientists are saying that there's flawed data and you're being drowned in a sea of money for scientific reality's sake. Meaning, you get paid if you say something's warming. You don't talk about warming, you lose your funding. And this is not some ragtag group of people that are high school teachers or something. This is Nobel laureates, theoretical physicists, meteorologists, professors, environmental science from across the planet, environmental scientists from across the entire planet. So that's the whole thing. If it was focused in one country, I could say maybe. When we got 1,600 scientists from across the planet, including astrophysicists, et cetera, saying, whoa, it's the sun driving a lot of this. Yeah, we put a lot of pollution in there. We put a lot of plastics. There is smoke in the air. We know we polluted this planet tremendously. We dig it up, we blast it, we burn it. But that's not what an ice age can do. That's not what a pole shift can do. That's not what a comet hitting our planet can do. Ask anybody back in the Younger Dryas era, circa 12,500 years ago, what the impact of a comet on an ice sheet can do. And you'll probably get a pretty stark answer like, you know what, you guys think because there's a little bit of gas in the atmosphere and you're talking about like a 2 degrees Celsius thing, dude, our temperatures dropped 20 degrees Fahrenheit in a matter of a year after the impact. And you think that you're going to be talking big whoop, 1 degree or 2 degrees over a whole century? They're like, dude, that happened in a flash of an instant. I mean, instantly, that hit the ice sheet, and the very next year, global temperatures drop some 13 to 20 degrees across the planet. Very few survivors. Luckily, the ones that survived, the only ones that were just pure luck were down near the equator. Otherwise, they would not have survived. You look, and there were some pockets in like cave areas that had microclimates within valleys. Otherwise, everything was wiped out. They were talking about that event brought our human population down to 10 million breeding pairs. So a possible maximum population through the estimates, they're not sure, they're guessing. A possible maximum estimate of 20 million humans were left after the event. 20 million, that's it. And though they found themselves and then they started to reproduce. So then that goes the whole full circle. Here we're at 8 billion people again. So Ransom, I'll pose the question to you. Like, what does this World Economic Forum see coming that's going to get such a cataclysmic event that it's going to bring us down to mere 10 millions of humans again? And, with genetic engineering and thing, are we going to see orphan trains pop up and they're kind of just being driven out of the laboratories and full of just to repopulate the cities like we see all these images of the mud flood and this sort of thing back in the past? I don't know. But there's a lot of similarities circling into, it seems like a cycle to me.
It's definitely a weird cycle. There's a sci-fi show, I think it's on Netflix, that's called Raised by Wolves, where in the future there was only two groups of human beings. There was the transhumanist group and then the ultra-religious dogma group that took control. It's kind of almost backwards, I think. But in that show, they sent out ships with genetic material inside and a couple of robots to raise the children. Now, I don't see that being too far-fetched. If something on purpose or on accident or natural happens in our world where the population is reduced to a very small amount and they need workforces or slaves, serfdom, to either entertain or do some kind of task. See, that's where it's weird to me, because I know we're at the point where they only need so many people to build an infrastructure of robotics. Then that infrastructure of robotics then only needs a certain amount of programmers and maintenancers before eventually those are also taken by AI, learning machines, and robotics. As far as the cycles go, it's very easy for me to see what's coming next. And I want to give you an example of how two, maybe not connected articles are directly connected, or maybe even three. Here's one. Could the UK be drawn into war? 3 threats that could spark World War III. And down here, as one of those, it lists the recently leaked document from the German Ministry of Defense earlier this week that laid out Russia's plan to launch a spring offensive in the Ukraine. Supposedly, that's according to them. But here's this article that I think is directly related to everything that's going on around the world. Germany, once a powerhouse, is at an economic standstill. Now, here's the next article right here. Leaked German military docs warn of World War III with Russia by 2025. That's next year. Hundreds of thousands of troops deployed in Europe. And then we have also NATO announcing their month-long exercise with 90,000 troops, Russia to add an additional 120,000 troops. And that's just in this Ukraine, Europe area. But here's the direct correlation. Obviously, what do countries do when they have economic problems? Well, traditionally, the United States goes to war. So if Germany, once the powerhouse of Europe, as far as economically, is now at an economic standstill, well, they need something to spark their economy, obviously. And so do many of the other European nations, because they put themselves in that position on purpose, which is probably linked, right? I mean, think about it. If you constantly make administration edicts to the public about farming, about, growing food of any kind, and you start shutting that all off and then complain that the economy is at a standstill, but don't worry, we got this war over here that's going to produce a lot of money. Not going to produce a lot of money for the peasants, but for the military industrial complex and economic complex, obviously it's going to make a lot of money and allow them to further some of their agendas. Redesigning the map is one of the main things that you always see after conflict, right? And you brought up Tartaria. That's exactly what's about to happen. I could guarantee you that in 25 years, the map of the world is not going to be the map that you learned in school. And matter of fact, probably if you're my age, the map that you learned in elementary school is already not the map of the world, because there's been, breakaway countries, new countries forming, like Ukraine, for example. That's always been considered Russia for like 900 years, basically. Now we're having a world dispute on whether or not it's Russian territory. We all know that we made a deal with Russia, NATO did, to not advance our military bases towards their border. Yet, in the past 20 years, that's exactly what we've done, all the way to the point where we're in 2014, when we had the color revolution in Ukraine, led by neo-Nazis that took control of the government there in 2014. And then you fast forward to now, and we have that country being a proxy for the entire world to start off World War III, one of many proxies. Obviously, another is in the Middle East. You have Yemen, Oman, Gaza, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, all potentially going to be sucked into a conflict there. And that seems to be the script that we're playing. It doesn't seem like some of these countries have any benefit in attacking the U.S., yet they continue to do it, which makes me think that we have proxy actors on their side of things, or provocateurs or assets, or whatever you want to call it, not unlike other countries in the past. We've had a lot of interference. It's well known in Iran, a lot of interference in Iraq through the decades. Well known, well documented, and we're seeing that plan come to fruition now. Just like General Gates said, they were going to knock down 7 countries, invade them. They've done that. Now we're seeing the after effects of that plan from the Project for a New American Century. And now they don't hide it in little think tanks anymore. We have it on the world stage right in your face at the World Economic Forum, where they're telling you that they are going to reduce the population on top of it already being naturally, progressively plateauing and then reducing on its own, and that they're going to push new ideas of transhumanism, stop people from eating meat. And think about that. If you've studied the evolution, I kind of use that word widely, or the history of how we came to be, meat is a major part of that. The big brain event that they talk about is directly correlated to us eating meat that allowed us to progress into the species that we are today, the consumption of meat. Now, it makes you wonder why, if meat helped us get big brains, helped us develop civilization, helped us develop agriculture, where people realized that they needed to domesticate animals so that they could have the meat right next to them instead of hunting it. And then they realized they had to have agriculture to support that. Now they're cutting it all off. Sorry, I didn't know we were out of time already.
All good, man. Taking us out on a deep thought. We'll be here with you next week. Remember, Revolution Radio, consider a donation. Keep it on air so we can keep our conversation flowing. We'll see you next week. David DuByne and Ransom Godwin signing off.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
At the starting of the week, at Summit Talk, you'll hear them speak. It's only Monday. Negotiations breaking down. See those leaders start to frown. Sword and gun day. Tomorrow never comes until it's too late. You could be sitting taking lunch. The news will hit you like a punch. It's only Tuesday. Tomorrow never comes until it's too late. Oh, that shadow, everything makes you all I know. It's only Friday. As you come out to the light, and your light for the night, it must be Tuesday. Tomorrow never comes until it's too late. Ain't it funny you told me the days are gone, they already it's only Saturday. I think tomorrow's come, I think it's too late. I think tomorrow's come, I think it's too late. Think tomorrow's come, I think it's too late.